Okay, we're going to begin the quarter by discussing the roots and early history of psychology. I always like to begin my classes with a little fact or falsehood quiz to see whether you already know everything and don't need to take the class, or if there are some things that'll be new to you that might be surprising about psychology. So let's start with a nice simple 5-item true or false, fact or falsehood style quiz. So in class, I have my students get out paper and pencil and we take it officially and score it at the end. So if you want to go ahead and play along like that, you could grab a piece of paper and a pencil and we'll take the quiz. I'll wait for you, or you can go ahead and pause the recording. Okay, hopefully everybody's back and hopefully you all have something to write on and write with. Okay, so on each of these questions, you're going to say whether you think this is true or false. So true or false? Sigmund Freud established the first psychology laboratory at the University of Vienna in Austria. Sigmund Freud established the first psychology laboratory at the University of Vienna, Austria. True or false? The science of psychology developed from the more established fields of biology and philosophy. The science of psychology developed from the more established fields of biology and philosophy. True or false? Psychology is best defined today as the study of mental life. Psychology is best defined today as the study of mental life. True or false? Mental processes include activities such as memory and language. Mental processes include activities such as memory and language. Finally, true or false? Behaviorism is primarily concerned with teaching animals how to behave. Behaviorism is primarily concerned with teaching animals how to behave. Okay, so hopefully you played along and answered all the questions. Now let's quickly go through and see what the correct answers are. And then as I go through the lecture, you'll see why the answers that are correct are the actual correct answers. Okay, so Sigmund Freud established the first psychology laboratory. That's false. Actually, Wilhelm Wundt founded the first psychology laboratory. Sigmund Freud was a psychiatrist, not a psychologist. The science of psychology developed from the more established fields of biology and philosophy. That's true. In fact, psychology is sort of a combination of those two, but we've moved beyond philosophy and into science. Psychology is best defined today as the study of mental life. That's false. Mental life, I'm not sure what that is. Psychology studies behavior and mental processes. Mental processes include activities such as memory and language. That's true. Pretty much anything that goes on inside your head, but that we can see evidence of through your behaviors, like can you write things down on a piece of paper from memory, or can you utter words that imply that you're thinking thoughts. So anything that's going on inside your head but can be represented with behaviors would be mental processes. And then finally, behaviorism is primarily concerned with teaching animals how to behave. That's false. Behaviorism is much more than that. It's a study of how we can train desirable behaviors and eliminate undesirable behaviors through a series of reinforcements and punishments and things like that. We'll talk about that in much more detail when we get to the chapter on learning. Okay, so that's a little quiz. See, hopefully you didn't get them all right, because that would imply that you need to continue on. If you got them all right, well, maybe I'll see you in the next lecture. Okay, let's go ahead and talk about what is psychology. As I mentioned in the Quizlet, the current definition of psychology is that it's the scientific study of behavior and mental processes. Okay, so there are a few things that need to be sort of elaborated on to make it really clear what that means, that psychology is the scientific study of behavior and mental processes. First off, scientific. Anything that is involved in answering questions using observable facts, data, and established methods is a thing that is engaging in science. That area is using science to answer those questions. It doesn't matter what your topic is. Science is about the methodology that you use to study the question. And so psychology uses scientific methods to study behavior and mental processes. So what do we mean by behavior? Behavior is any observable action. So I compiled some pictures of behaviors, and the nice thing about behaviors is because they're observable, it's easy to take pictures of them. So we have a whale breaching, a child apparently throwing a temper tantrum in the corner, a man hearing, a man laughing, a man nuzzling a woman, a baby sleeping, right? These are all observable behaviors. Laughing, nuzzling, sleeping, hearing, tantruming, breaching, right? These are all things that we can see out in the world. For a long time, psychology focused just on these kinds of observable behaviors, and it was really fruitful to study those topics initially because it gave us a background in sort of just understanding from the scientific method approach, people's behaviors and animals' behaviors. But pretty soon, psychologists started getting a little frustrated because there are a lot of things that go on inside of our heads called mental processes that we would like to understand. Mental processes are things that have to be inferred from your behavior. So when I see the whale breaching, I might infer that he's engaging in a mental process of expressing joy. And I think a lot of people mistakenly think that that's why whales breach. But now we also know that whales breach because they're trying to communicate with whales that are farther away and they're making a noise that they know the other whales will hear. We have to infer that, though, from their behavior, from the behavior of the other whales, from the fact that they tend to do it when they're in isolation, away from their pods, stuff like that, right? You can kind of infer that must be what's going on. So when we talk about mental processes, we have, it's harder to find pictures of them because these are things that have to be inferred. So we've got personality. We can infer your personality from your responses on a personality test, or from your behavior at a party, or your behavior across lots of different situations, things like that. The girl on the top right is supposed to be thinking. I thought that was sort of a universal. I'm thinking of the answer to a question picture, so she's thinking something. We're going to assume that maybe she's trying to retrieve a memory, or that she's trying to solve a math problem, or something like that, right? That there are cognitions going on inside of her head. Love is something that has to be inferred from behaviors, and one of the things, love is a great example because it illustrates that you can have something that's really hard to pin down, like what is love, and yet you can study it if you define it correctly and focus on certain behaviors that you've defined as evidence of the behavior that of the mental process that you're trying to infer. So I might say that giving a woman a rose and nuzzling her cheek is what I'm going to call love, and then I might be able to directly observe whether couples engage in that behavior or not, and whether they seem to be displaying my definition of love. So that's a great example of one of those things that for sure has to be inferred. I use the smiley faces to imply, happiness, because those kinds of emotional states have to be inferred from your facial expressions, your behaviors, things like that. The woman holding her head in her hands is an example of, I was trying to use her as an example of like depression, because a lot of times mental illness has to be inferred from behaviors that are disordered. And then finally, I've got a person taking a test that represents, memory. Memory is not something we can directly observe in your head. We have to get you to display behaviors that are evidence that you're remembering something, and then we can infer that it must have been stored in your brain somewhere. So that's our breakdown of what the definition of psychology means: the scientific study of behavior and mental processes. Okay, let's go ahead and stop here, and I'll come back in the next segment and talk about the roots of psychology coming out of philosophy.